Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin Understanding the Shadow. This is not a course filled with shallow platitudes or motivational fluff. It is not about plastering over your deepest pain with a few words of encouragement and pretending everything is fine. Instead, this is a direct, uncompromising dive into one of the most profound concepts in modern psychology, Carl Gustav Jung's idea of the shadow. The goal is as clear as it is demanding to help you master this hidden force within yourself and become emotionally unshakable. If you are here, you probably feel the pull of that promise. Perhaps you struggle with anxiety, depression, guilt, anger, grief, or a constant undercurrent of emotional unease. Perhaps you have noticed a pattern of frustrating repetition of self-destructive behaviors you can't seem to escape. Maybe no matter how hard you try, true emotional control feels just out of reach. Or perhaps there is a heavier burden. Deep, unnameable pain that has been with you so long you can't remember a time without it. This first chapter is about naming the source of much of that pain and exposing it to the light. Once you understand what the shadow is, you begin to see the hidden threads pulling at your thoughts, emotions, and decisions. What is the shadow? Jung gave the name shadow to the collection of traits, emotions, impulses, and memories that we reject, repress, or refuse to acknowledge as part of ourselves. It is the dark mirror of our identity, filled with the things we would rather not admit we feel, think, or desire. But here's the critical truth. Just because you deny these aspects doesn't mean they cease to exist. In fact, repression gives them power. The shadow lives on in the depths of the unconscious, influencing your behavior and emotions in ways you cannot easily trace. The roots of your shadow stretch back to childhood. From the moment you were old enough to understand approval and disapproval, you were taught by parents, teachers, peers, and the culture around you what was acceptable and what was unacceptable. You learned that being polite, obedient, and agreeable earned you praise. You also learned that showing anger, envy, selfishness, deep sadness, or other raw emotions brought criticism, punishment, or rejection. As a child, survival meant adapting. And adaptation often meant hiding parts of yourself. You pushed these unwanted traits into a dark corner of your mind, out of sight and out of conversation. That dark corner is where the shadow is born. Why the shadow doesn't stay hidden, many believe that if they bury these aspects deep enough, they disappear. But the mind is not a simple container where you can throw away unwanted parts. What is repressed remains alive, growing in the unconscious. Over time, it quietly shapes your emotional responses, thoughts, and behaviors. Imagine an underground river that runs beneath your house. You can't see it, and you rarely think about it, but it is always there, exerting pressure on the foundation. If the pressure builds too high, cracks form. The shadow operates in much the same way. Anxiety can be one of those cracks, the indirect manifestation of unacknowledged inner conflicts. Depression can be the weight of unprocessed emotions pressing down from the depths. Explosive anger can be the voice of long-ignored parts of yourself demanding to be heard. Self-sabotage can be the shadow turning against the goals your conscious mind has set. The shadow is not inherently evil. In fact, it contains energy, creativity, and strength that, if integrated, could enrich your life. But, as long as it remains unrecognized, it will continue to act autonomously, often in ways that cause emotional suffering. The price of avoidance. Why do so many people stay stuck in cycles of emotional pain? Because they live under the illusion that they are only their good side, the parts they feel comfortable showing to the world. They polish their image, carefully managing how others see them, while pushing away anything that might contradict that image. This creates a fragile foundation. The more you deny your shadow, the more emotionally vulnerable you become. The shadow doesn't vanish simply because you ignore it. It gathers strength in the darkness, finding subtle ways to express itself. Sometimes it erupts in destructive bursts. Sometimes it quietly shapes your relationships, career choices, or self-image, as long as you run from these hidden parts. You remain at their mercy. Integration, not perfection. Integrating the shadow is not about becoming flawless. It is about becoming whole. It means accepting that emotions like anger, envy, fear, and the desire for control are part of the human experience. By bringing these aspects into the light of conscious awareness, you strip them of the power to sabotage you from the shadows. When you integrate your shadow, you begin to see it as a source of insight. Anger becomes a signal that a boundary has been crossed. Envy becomes a clue about unfulfilled desires. Fear becomes a teacher about where growth is possible. This doesn't mean indulging every dark impulse. It means acknowledging them, understanding where they come from, and finding constructive ways to channel their energy. Why this work matters: the shadow exerts a profound influence over your emotional life. If you have ever found yourself in the middle of an argument, saying things you never meant to say, if you have ever made a decision you later regretted but couldn't explain, if you have ever felt an emotion so intense it seemed to hijack your mind, you have experienced the shadow at work. The key to emotional mastery lies not in avoiding these moments, but in understanding their roots. When you shine a light into the shadow, you begin to recognize its patterns in real time. You see how certain triggers lead to certain reactions. You notice the gap between an event and your emotional response, and in that gap, you gain the power to choose a different path. The journey ahead. This course will guide you step by step through that process. You will learn how to spot your shadow in everyday life, how to confront it without fear, and how to integrate it into your conscious self. We will explore not only the personal shadow, but also the deeper layers of the psych archetypes, the persona, and the collective unconscious. and how they influence your emotions and decisions. You will also learn why repression of the shadow lies at the heart of many psychological disorders, and how the mask you show to the world can either protect you or keep you trapped. You'll see how archetypes like the trickster or the self emerge to either help or hinder your progress. Most importantly, you will leave with practical tools to apply this work in your daily life. But this is not passive learning. Simply watching or reading will change nothing. True transformation requires personal work, a willingness to pause, take notes, reflect, and face discomfort. It will demand courage, because the path runs straight through the parts of yourself you have spent years avoiding. Yet, beyond that, discomfort lies a kind of emotional freedom that is impossible to find any other way. A first glimpse into the shadow's power for now. Remember this: you are not just the image you present to the world. You are not only your light, you are also the darkness you fear to admit. That darkness will continue to influence your life whether you acknowledge it or not. The question is not whether you have a shadow, you do. The question is whether you will choose to face it consciously or remain controlled by it in the dark. In the chapters ahead, we will explore how this hidden force operates and how you can reclaim the parts of yourself that have been lost to it. This is the beginning of a journey not toward perfection, but toward wholeness. And once you start, there is no turning back to the comfort of ignorance. How the shadow controls you. In the previous chapter, we explored what the shadow is. The repressed side of your personality that contains everything you would rather not see in yourself. Now, we step into the more uncomfortable truth. The shadow is not just sitting in the depths of your mind, waiting quietly. It is active. It is influencing you every single day, whether you realize it or not. Jung put it plainly: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is not poetic exaggeration. 8. It is a direct statement of psychological reality. Your shadow is constantly shaping your emotional responses, decision-making, and even the patterns of your life story. You think you are fully in control, but much of your behavior is actually being steered by forces you have never faced. The shadow is not abstract. When people first hear about the shadow, they often imagine it as a vague, philosophical concept, something symbolic rather than practical. But the shadow is not an idea. It is a living system within your psyche. It works through your emotions, impulses, and habits. It emerges in the heat of the moment, in the choices you later regret, and in the recurring struggles you can't seem to escape. Consider these scenarios. You explode in anger over something trivial, surprising even yourself with the intensity. You feel a sudden wave of anxiety before a social event. Even though there's no real threat, you procrastinate on an important opportunity, sabotaging yourself for reasons you can't explain. You meet someone and instantly dislike them without any logical justification. These are not random quirks. They are often the fingerprints of the shadow. The early training in repression from childhood. You were trained to repress certain feelings: anger, envy, fear, selfishness, these were labeled as bad, immature, or unacceptable. You learned quickly that showing them led to disapproval or punishment. So you pushed them down, tucking them away where no one could see. But repression is not deletion. The energy of these emotions remains stored in your unconscious building. Pressure over time. The shadow becomes the keeper of all these forbidden parts, and when the conditions are right, it lets them slip or burst to your conscious life. Emotions under the shadows control many of the emotions you think just happen are, in fact, shadow expressing itself. Anxiety often comes from shadow content, buried fears, unresolved conflicts, or repressed insecurities that you have never consciously addressed. Anger outbursts can be the shadow's way of forcing you to acknowledge boundaries you've long ignored. Unexplained, sadness can be grief or disappointment buried so deep you no longer remember its origin. Chronic guilt can stem from internalized rules and judgments that were never truly yours but have taken root in your unconscious. When these emotions are triggered, they can feel overwhelming and automatic because they bypass rational thought. They are driven by complexes, clusters of repressed feelings and ideas that act independently of your conscious will. Decision-making in the shadow's grip. A shadow doesn't only influence how you feel, it also shapes the choices you make. If you have ever wondered why you keep repeating certain mistakes, it is often because the shadow is quietly guiding you toward familiar patterns, even when they hurt you. For example, you repeatedly choose partners who are emotionally unavailable, reinforcing a deep unconscious belief that love must involve rejection or struggle. You sabotage career opportunities, driven by hidden fears of failure or fear of success and the responsibilities it brings. You adopt self-deprecating attitudes to preempt the criticism you secretly expect from others. These choices feel self-inflicted, but they are the shadow pulling you into situations that reflect unresolved parts of yourself. The role of the persona to understand how the shadow gains so much control. We must examine its partner in disguise. The persona. The persona is the social mask you wear to interact with the world. It is the image you present to be liked, respected, or accepted. You learned early which behaviors earned approval and which earned punishment. So you emphasized the former and hid the latter. Over time, this adaptive behavior solidified into a fixed mask. The problem is, the more perfect and controlled the persona appears, the more material gets shoved into the shadow to maintain it. People who seem unshakably together in public often battle deep turmoil in private. Their shadow has been growing unchecked in the darkness, and when it bursts forth, it does so with great force. Jung warned that the persona is a compromise with society, but also a form of self-deception. If you identify too strongly with the mask, you become disconnected from your authentic self. And the shadow gains the upper hand. The illusion of control. Perhaps you believe you are in total control of your emotions. After all, you keep calm in public, maintain polite conversations, and don't lose it in front of others. But emotional control on the surface can hide a very different reality underneath. The shadow thrives in the darkness of denial. It gathers strength the longer it is ignored. And because it operates outside your awareness, it can influence you in ways you won't recognize until after the damage is done. Ignoring it doesn't mean it disappears. In fact, it often means it will find a more subtle and cunning way to shape your life. Breaking the illusion, the good news is this. Once you start seeing the shadow's patterns, you can begin to loosen its grip. Awareness is the first step. Identifying the situations, triggers, and recurring problems that are fueled by the shadow allows you to respond consciously rather than react automatically. This is not easy work. Many resist it because it means confronting parts of themselves they have long tried to bury. It can be deeply uncomfortable to admit that you carry resentment, jealousy, fear, or cruelty within you. But denying these truths does not make them less real. It only makes you more vulnerable to being controlled by them. Why this step is critical without facing your shadow. You will always be vulnerable to repeating old cycles. You will find yourself back in the same arguments, the same toxic relationships, same frustrating career patterns, wondering why nothing seems to change. By learning to identify your shadow's influence, you begin reclaiming authority over your inner life. You recognize that emotions are signals, not enemies. You understand that self-sabotage is not random, but the work of an inner force trying to resolve unfinished business. This awareness gives you a choice, and that choice is the foundation of emotional freedom. From awareness to application, the question now becomes, how do you apply this knowledge? Recognizing your shadow is one thing. Working with it is another. That's why this process requires a shift from intellectual understanding to practical, consistent self-observation. In the next chapter, we will explore how to recognize the shadow in real time, your emotions, your reactions, your judgments, and even your dreams. You will learn to spot its subtle fingerprints in your daily life so you can stop being caught off guard. Once you see the shadow clearly, you can engage with it directly rather than letting it pull the strings from behind. The curtain. This is the turning point, moving from being unconsciously controlled to consciously empowered. Recognizing and confronting the shadow. In the previous chapter, we explored how the shadow subtly but powerfully controls your emotions, thoughts, and decisions. We saw how it can lead to cycles of self-sabotage, toxic patterns, and unconscious reactions. Now, the question becomes, how can you actually spot it in action? How can you tell the difference between a normal emotional response and the shadow exerting its influence? Recognition is the first step toward freedom. You cannot confront what you cannot see, but here's the challenge: your shadow does not announce itself. It hides behind rationalizations, disguises itself as justified emotion, and often makes you believe the problem lies entirely outside yourself. Learning to identify it requires patience, honesty, and the courage to question your own perceptions. Where? the shadow hides. Jung observed that the shadow tends to reveal itself in moments when we are overtaken by intense, disproportionate emotions. This could be a sudden surge of rage, a flash of envy, an unexpected wave of guilt, or a deep sadness that seems to come from nowhere. The shadow also emerges in projections. When we attribute to others qualities we refuse to see in ourselves. If someone at work irritates you beyond reason, it's worth asking, is this about them, or is this about a part of me I cannot accept? For example, you feel strong resentment toward a colleague who takes credit for their work. On reflection, you realize you have a buried belief that you never speak up for yourself, something you've avoided acknowledging. You judge people for being emotionally vulnerable, calling them weak, only to realize you have suppressed your own sensitivity for years out of fear of being judged. Common expressions of the shadow. The shadow often appears in recognizable patterns. Some of the most common include sudden and disproportionate emotional reactions. You feel anger, hatred, or contempt far greater than the situation calls for. Overly harsh. Moral judgments. You condemn others with a kind of self-righteous certainty, not realizing you are condemning in them what you deny in yourself. Envy and jealousy. You resent others' success or happiness, even when you outwardly wish them well. Chronic procrastination or avoidance. You put off important actions because of fears you've never confronted. Excessive guilt or shame. You feel unworthy for reasons you cannot fully explain. It can also surface physically. Chronic muscle tension, fatigue, headaches, or other stress-related symptoms can be the body's way of holding in repressed emotional energy. Dreams as a doorway. Jung placed great emphasis on dreams as a way to recognize shadow material. The unconscious communicates symbolically, and dreams often dramatize the struggles we suppress during waking life. Recurring dreams about being chased, losing control, facing aggressive animals, or encountering shadowy figures can signal the presence of repressed content seeking integration. For example, a dream in which you are pursued by an unknown figure may reflect a disowned part of yourself you have been avoiding. Keeping a dream journal can reveal patterns over time. Writing down your dreams upon waking allows you to study recurring themes, images, and emotional tones that may be connected to shadow content. The courage to look within. Recognizing the shadow is uncomfortable. It means admitting to feelings and impulses that clash with the image you have of yourself. It means acknowledging that you are not purely good, that you carry anger, jealousy, cruelty, or selfishness within you. This is where most people turn away. The persona, the mask you wear in public, risks this work because it threatens the idealized image you present to the world. The temptation is to retreat into self-justification or to blame others for the emotions you feel. But real growth begins the moment you choose honesty over comfort. Confronting the shadow. Recognition is only the first half of the work. Confrontation is the second, and it is far more challenging. Jung wrote that individuation, the process of becoming whole, is not achieved by denying the shadow, but by facing it with courage. Confrontation means staying present with the emotions and impulses you uncover instead of suppressing them again. It means asking, where does this come from? What does it reveal about me? Without rushing to judgment or self-condemnation. For example, you feel envy toward a friend's career success. Instead of dismissing it as petty, you admit it exists. You ask yourself whether it reflects unacknowledged desires for your own career that you've been avoiding. You realize you avoid confrontation at all costs. Digging deeper, you discover a repressed anger from past experiences of being disrespected or ignored. Accepting this anger as legitimate is part of reclaiming your voice. The phases of confrontation when you begin facing your shadow. You often pass through several stages. Denial, you resist accepting that certain traits or emotions belong to you. Resistance, you feel guilt, shame, or fear when you begin to acknowledge them. Acceptance, you consciously recognize these parts as legitimate aspects of your psyche. Integration, you gradually absorb these aspects into your conscious identity, reducing their power to act autonomously. This is not a linear process. The shadow will surface again and again in different forms, and each time, the work is to meet it with awareness rather than avoidance. Practical tools for confrontation: reflective writing, journaling about moments of strong emotional reaction can reveal patterns over time. Describe the event, your feelings, and what they might say about you. Internal dialogue: when a difficult emotion arises, imagine speaking directly to it. Ask what it wants and what it fears. Therapy or coaching, a skilled guide, can help. You spot patterns you may be too close to see. Mindfulness, meditation. This trains you to observe emotions without identifying with them, creating space for conscious choice. Dream analysis, study recurring dream symbols and connect them to your waking life. What? Confrontation is not confronting the shadow does not mean indulging every dark impulse. It does not mean acting out anger, jealousy, or fear in destructive ways. Integration is about acknowledgement, not justification. You don't give the shadow free rein. You give it a seat at the table so you can hear what it has to say and decide consciously how to respond. The role of compassionate is essential to approach shadow work with self-compassion. The traits and emotions you repress were often formed as coping mechanisms. The child who learned to hide their anger may have done so to avoid punishment. The adult who avoids vulnerability may have once been shamed for expressing it. When you confront the shadow, you are not attacking yourself. You are listening to the parts of you that have been silenced for years. This work requires firmness, but also gentleness. Preparing for the deeper journey, recognizing and confronting the shadow, is the gateway to a deeper psychological transformation. But as you do this work, you will also begin to encounter forces within the psyche that go beyond the personal shadow universal patterns Jung called archetypes. These archetypes, such as the anima, animus, self, and trickster, often emerge during shadow integration, influencing your dreams, relationships, and inner conflicts. They can serve as guides, allies, or obstacles in the process of becoming whole. In the next chapter, I will explore these archetypes in detail, how they appear, what they symbolize, and how they can either accelerate your growth or test your commitment to the work. For now, remember this: spotting the shadow in the moment is an act of power. Every time you catch it influencing your thoughts or emotions, you weaken its hold. Every time you sit with an uncomfortable truth instead of running from it, you reclaim another piece of yourself. This is the essence of shadow work, not eradicating darkness, but bringing light into the places you once feared to look. Archetypes in the journey. As you begin confronting and integrating your shadow, you will notice that the process is not just about personal memories, old wounds, or repressed emotions. Something deeper starts to emerge: patterns, symbols, and inner figures that feel strangely familiar, even if you've never consciously encountered them before. Carl Gustav Jung called these patterns, archetypes, universal, inherited structures of the psyche that shape how we experience the world. They are not learned. They are inborn frameworks, like the blueprints for the human mind. Jung described them as forms without content, that fill with personal and cultural meaning as we live our lives. When you engage seriously in shadow work, for archetypes tend to appear with particular force: anima, animus, self, and trickster. Each can be an ally, a teacher, or a saboteur, depending on how consciously you relate to it. The anima and animus, inner counterparts, Jung believe that every man carries an unconscious feminine side, the anima, and every woman carries an unconscious masculine side, the animus. These inner counterparts act as bridges between your conscious mind and the unconscious, and they often surface during deep psychological work. The anima may appear in dreams, fantasies, or projections, as a woman seductive, nurturing, dangerous, wise, or some combination of these. She represents qualities that a man has repressed or neglected, such as emotional openness, receptivity, or intuition. The animus, on the other hand, often appears to women as a man-dominant, protective, authoritarian, or inspiring. He represents traits a woman may have suppressed, such as assertiveness, rationality, or independence. Practical example: a man working through his shadow has recurring dreams of a mysterious woman guiding him through dark hallways. At first, he experiences her as alluring, but also unsettling. Over time, he realizes she embodies his own suppressed emotional sensitivity, something he had long dismissed as weakness. By integrating these qualities, he becomes more whole. Similarly, a woman might find herself drawn to powerful, opinionated male figures in waking life, or she might dream of a commanding voice giving her direction. This could be the animus calling her to integrate her own capacity for decisive action and self-reliance, the self. The archetype of wholeness, the self, is the central archetype in Jung's psychology, the organizing principle of the entire psyche, encompassing both conscious and unconscious elements. It is not the ego. In fact, it often appears to challenge the ego's dominance. The self seeks to balance the different parts of your personality, guiding you to toward individuation, the process of becoming your true integrated self. When the self emerges, you may experience a profound sense of inner unity or encounter symbolic images of wholeness, such as circles, mandalas, or balanced opposites. But the self does not arrive as pure bliss often brings. With it, an existential reckoning. Practical example: after months of shadow work, you might feel a deep calm and clarity about who you are, only to be confronted by urgent questions about your life's purpose, values, and direction. The self is not simply handing you peace. It is demanding that you align your outer life with your inner truth. The trickster, the master of deception of all the archetypes that emerge during shadow work. The trickster can be the most treacherous. He is the archetype of chaos, disruption, and rule-breaking. The trickster often appears when you start to feel confident in your progress and your humility, clarity, and commitment. He can manifest as a charming manipulator, a mocking voice in your head, or a sudden temptation to break your own hard-won discipline. Sometimes, he doesn't look threatening at all. He may flatter your ego into believing you are above the work now, that you've mastered your shadow and no longer need to keep your guard up. Practical example: after months of breakthroughs, you catch yourself looking down on others who haven't done the work. You feel a subtle satisfaction in being more aware or enlightened. This is the trickster inflating your ego, pulling you into a new form of self-deception. His purpose is to remind you that the journey is never over and that arrogance is just another mask for the shadow. How archetypes, peer archetypes, can surface in many ways. Dreams, recurring symbolic figures, animals, or settings that feel charged with meaning, projections, intense attractions, or repulsions. Toward people in your life who embody qualities you haven't integrated. Life events, situations that force you into roles you never expected. Triggering unexplored parts of yourself. For example, a sudden leadership role might awaken an animus-like assertiveness in a woman. Or an unexpected caregiving responsibility might awaken an animal-like empathy in a man. Working with archetypes, the key to navigating archetypes is conscious engagement. Ignoring them allows them to influence you unconsciously. Trying to banish them creates inner conflict. Instead, you can observe. Notice when certain figures, symbols, or patterns appear repeatedly in dreams or relationships. Dialogue, in journaling, or active imagination. Speak with these figures. Ask what they want, what they fear, and what they offer. Integrate, consciously bring the qualities they represent into your life in healthy ways. Rather than letting them run wild, remember, archetypes are not literal beings. They are aspects of your own psyche, dressed in symbolic form. Treating them as allies rather than enemies allows them to contribute to your growth. The push and pull of the process as you work with archetypes, you will notice they sometimes act as guides, leading you toward deeper integration. At other times, they will challenge or obstruct you, forcing you to confront blind spots you didn't know you had. The anima or Animus might draw you toward relationships that mirror your unintegrated qualities, offering both attraction and frustration. The self might bring sudden clarity about the changes you need to make in your life, changes that feel risky or uncomfortable. The trickster might deliberately lead you into mistakes, so you can see where you are still clinging to illusions. Why? Archetypes matter in shadow work. If shadow work were only about facing personal memories or repressed emotions, the process might be simpler, though still difficult. But because the shadow is tied into the larger architecture of the psyche, its integration inevitably stirs these deeper forces. Archetypes are like currents in a vast ocean. When you dive deep enough, you cannot avoid them. Working with archetypes ensures that your shadow integration is not just a surface-level self-improvement project, but a true transformation of how you relate to yourself, others, and the world. The risks of ignoring archetypes, failing to recognize archetypes when they appear, can lead to serious pitfalls, mistaking an archetypal figure for a literal person or event, leading to unhealthy relationships or decisions, falling into the ego traps set by the trickster, undoing much of your progress, resisting the call of the self, which can create a prolonged sense of emptiness or meaninglessness. When you ignore these forces, they don't disappear. They act out through your life, often in disruptive or painful ways. From archetypes to integration, recognizing archetypes and learning to work with them is not an optional side quest. It is part of the core journey. The self, anima, animus, and trickster each hold a piece of the puzzle of who you are. By engaging with them, you gain access to qualities, strengths, and insights that would otherwise remain hidden or distorted. In the next chapter, we will explore what happens when the shadow is integrated, how it changes your emotional resilience, your relationships, and your overall sense of self. We will see why those who complete this work become less reactive, more authentic, and genuinely unshakable in the face of life's challenges. But remember, the archetypes are not there to be defeated. They are there to be understood, respected, and woven into the fabric of your being. If the shadow is the hidden half of your personal story, the archetypes are the mythic characters who help you live it to its fullest depth. Living the integration. By now, you've explored the shadow's origins, seen how it controls you, learned to recognize and confront it, and met the deeper archetypes that emerge along the way. But there's an important truth to understand. As we reach this final chapter, integration is not the end of the journey. It is the way you live from now on. Many people imagine shadow work as a one-time project. You dig deep, face your darkness, heal it, and then you're done. Jung would disagree. The shadow is part of you for life. New layers emerge as you grow, and each stage of your life presents fresh opportunities and challenges for integration. Living the integration means keeping your awareness alive daily, applying what you've learned, and developing habits that keep your shadow in the light rather than letting it retreat into the unconscious. Integration is a lifestyle, not an event. When you bring shadow content into consciousness, you reclaim energy that was previously tied up in repression. You become more authentic, more resilient, and less reactive. But this doesn't mean you'll never feel anger, envy, fear, or sadness again. Those emotions remain part of the human experience. They simply stop controlling you from the shadows. Think of integration as maintaining a garden. You may have cleared out the weeds and planted new seeds, but if you neglect it, weeds will return. The unconscious is fertile ground. What you plant and how you tend it determines whether you grow beauty or chaos. Daily practices for staying integrated. Here are practical ways to live in ongoing dialogue with your shadow and the archetypes you've met along the way. Conscious internal dialogue. When a strong emotion arises, shame, jealousy, pause. What is this really about? What part of me feels threatened or unheard? This habit turns moments of reactivity into opportunities for insight. Reflective writing. Dedicate a few minutes each day to journaling about situations that provoked strong feelings. Name the triggers, note your reactions, and explore any underlying beliefs or memories they connect to. Over time, you'll see patterns emerge. Dream journaling. Keep a notebook by your bed and write down dreams as soon as you wake up. Pay attention to recurring symbols, figures, and emotions. Dreams often reveal shadow content before it surfaces. In waking life, mindfulness practice. Mindfulness is the art of noticing without judgment. Practicing it daily through meditation, slow walking, or simply pausing to breathe helps you create a gap between stimulus and response, giving you the power to choose your actions consciously. Relational awareness. Use your relationships as mirrors. When someone provokes a strong reaction, positive or negative, ask if it might be a projection of your own unacknowledged qualities. Boundary setting. Many shadow patterns emerge from people-pleasing or conflict avoidance. Learning to say no when necessary is a powerful act of integration. Affirming your right to protect your energy. Persona reviews every few months. Ask yourself, what am I hiding right now to maintain my image? If you notice you're wearing a new mask too tightly, consider what it's covering. The benefits of integration in daily life. When you live in integration, several things change. Emotional resilience. Intense emotions no longer throw you off balance as easily. You can experience anger, fear, or sadness without being swept away by them. Reduced reactivity. You catch yourself before you lash out or withdraw. You can pause, reflect, and choose a response aligned with your values. Authenticity. You no longer need to hide behind a perfect persona. You can show up as your full self-light. And shadow in relationships and work. Clarity in decision-making because you understand your unconscious motivations. You make choices based on conscious values rather than old patterns. Deeper relationships. As you stop projecting your shadow onto others, you can see them more clearly, fostering empathy and trust. The temptation to slip back even after significant progress. The shadow will test you. The trickster archetype might try to pull you into ego inflation, making you feel above others. Old patterns might resurface under stress, tempting you to to fall back into familiar but destructive habits. This is why ongoing awareness is essential. Recognizing that the shadow adapts means you must adapt as well, remaining flexible, honest, and committed to self-observation. What happens if you stop the work if you neglect integration? The shadow doesn't disappear, it retreats, regroups, and eventually finds a way to reassert itself. You may notice recurring emotional struggles you thought you'd resolved, a growing gap between your public persona and your private feelings, subtle self-sabotage in relationships or work. The cost of ignoring the shadow is high psychological suffering, chronic dissatisfaction, and a sense of disconnection from yourself. Why the work is worth it? Those who commit to living in integration enjoy a form of emotional freedom that is rare. They are not immune to life's challenges, but they face them from a place of inner stability. They can embrace the complexity of human nature without falling into self-deception. Jung put it this way: the acceptance of the dark side of oneself strengthens the individual as they begin to relate more honestly and consciously to life. When you stop fearing your own depths, you stop fearing the depths of life itself. A lifelong process. Integration is a lifelong dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious. As you grow, new layers of the shadow will emerge, shaped by your current stage of life, responsibilities, and relationships. Each time, the process will be familiar: recognition, confrontation, dialogue, and integration. Rather than seeing this as a burden, you can see it as a path to constant renewal. With each cycle, you become more grounded, more self-aware, and more capable of meeting life with courage. Making a commitment to live the integration is to make a commitment, one that you reaffirm regularly. This commitment is not to be perfect, but to be honest. Not to eliminate the shadow, but to keep it in sight, to learn from it, and to let it inform your wholeness. A simple way to anchor this is with a personal affirmation, such as, I welcome all parts of myself into awareness. I am willing to see the truth, even when it is uncomfortable. Repeating such a statement daily can help keep you grounded in the reality of the work. Moving forward, at this point, you understand that shadow work is more than a psychological technique, is a way of living that honors the full complexity of your humanity. By practicing daily awareness, engaging with archetypes, and holding both light and darkness in your conscious self, you step into a level of authenticity and resilience that few achieve. You will still face challenges. You will still meet new shadows, but you will meet them with open eyes and an open heart, knowing that they are not enemies to destroy, but parts of yourself to understand and integrate. And that is what it truly means to become emotionally unshakable.